Welcome to Drinking with Authors. I'm your host, Erica Lance. My co-host today is the amazing Bo Lake, and our guest today is Liza Taylor. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, let's talk about what we're drinking. So I was recently in Ireland and Scotland, and this is going to go to the story of what I'm drinking, I promise. One of my friends was there, kept ordering this thing, and I thought it was so disgusting. I'm like, why do you keep ordering that? And it was gin and ginger ale. And yes, the same face that Bo just made. That was the face I made many a nights while they were ordering this. And I was like, what are you doing? And then finally they're like, just taste it. And I was like, okay. And I was ready for it to be terrible. It is magnificent. It sounds like it with Bo. You're going to try it next time you're with me. I didn't put the one too is they have rhubarb gin over there, which is even better. But this is just regular botanical gin and fever tree ginger ale. I'm just saying it's pretty epic. I think people should try it. There we go. Bo, what are you drinking?
I am just drinking water today. I'm not having any fun. I already drank a bunch of coffee, so I can't drink more coffee.
I understand that. I do. Liza, what are you drinking?
I am drinking my favorite afternoon summer cocktail, an Aperol Spritz with a sprig of rosemary from my garden.
I love that. So I had one of those for the first time when I was in Ireland as well. And they're amazing. They have grapefruit in them. It's
a bitter orange aperitif. So super refreshing when it's hot. It's almost 100 in Virginia where I'm sitting right now.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Yes. I'm not going to say what temperature it is here because I'll just piss people off. Okay. So for those that may not know you, what do you write?
I write historical novels, and the two I've had published are set in 1924, and the second one, which is a standalone sequel, is set in 1932 in Virginia, in the house where I'm sitting now, which is an old farmhouse. And there are settings in New York, in Prohibition era New York, and Jazz Age Paris, and Washington, D.C., and Boston.
Wow. So we like to Scooby-Doo this. When did you start your writing career?
I was really, really late to the party. When my daughter went away to school, I was an empty nester, and I wasn't working full time anymore. And I decided that I was going to use that time to do something I wanted to do for myself. So I went back to school to study English literature, and I went to our local community college, and I had this rock star professor, and I took everything he was teaching, and then that morphed into trying to get a second degree in literature.
Wow.
And I loved talking to people about books and writing. And then that led to my first writing course. I think it was 10 years ago. And it was how to write a novel, was basically for college credit. And I started working on what is now my first novel. And the class ended, and I thought, I really enjoy doing this, putting the words together and coming up with a story and doing the research. And so I stuck with it, and looking for that English degree, I ended up applying for MFA programs and went to Vermont College of Fine Arts starting in 2016, finished in 2018. And when I started that program, I had been signed with my first agent in a revise and resubmit status. I don't know if you know what that is for the
Absolutely.
For the listeners.
I'm a publisher too. I know exactly what revise and resubmit means.
Okay. So yes. So she liked my work, but felt like it wasn't, ready to send out yet.
Right.
So for 11 months, we worked together, and then I was getting my MFA, and I was excited about where my writing was going and how it was evolving. But I was getting away from being the writer that this agent had signed. And she did sign me, but then we broke up. Anyway, what happened was I had that finished manuscript, and I got another agent and was working on that. So for my MFA work, I had to come up with new work. Every month I had to turn in 30 pages of new work.
Oh, wow.
And so I was thinking, I can't be working on this first novel with my advisors. So I started a second novel and made it a sequel just because I already had the characters and the settings and everything, So
it's not cheating. It's not cheating.
So piggybacking. Yeah. So then that ended up being my second novel.
That's very cool. What made you choose historical fiction?
Well, I've always loved, my favorite books are books from I love Victorian English literature. I really am drawn to those sorts of books more than modern writing. And I love history. So I started doing research. And when I was starting my first book, and taking this class, as I told you, I was texting and walking and I fell and I broke my ankle. And I was stuck at home with a broken right ankle for 8 weeks, sitting on my porch in September. And the teacher said, you have to first pick a setting for your novel. And I said, it's going to be set right here because I can't move from here. And the house where I am now was built around 1820. It was just a simple farmhouse. But I thought there's some stories, in this house. And what would be an interesting time period to write about? If the house was built around 1820, what's an interesting time? And one thing that really influenced where the story started was a piece of, I wish I'd brought it downstairs with me, a piece of porcelain, which is a fractured shard of a Victorian doll's face. And when I'm digging around out in the yard in my garden, I find antique bottles and old horseshoes and pieces of pottery and porcelain. And I found this doll's face piece. And I remember thinking, I wonder whose doll this was. And what was that little girl's life like growing up here at Keswick Farm at the turn of the century? Or, what's the story behind this and how did it get broken? And so that really was my starting point, was the house. And then the house is also a setting in the second novel.
That's wonderful, I think. But when you went for this, did you go to it when you went down the English literature? Were you like, I want to be a writer? Was that your thought in doing it?
No, it was, I love these books and I love being able to write about them and research the authors and talk to other people about them. This was all happening right when online learning was taking off. And so all of a sudden I could take a course from Harvard, and I took a course called Crime and Horror in Victorian Literature and Culture. And we read, Frankenstein and Dracula, and I just loved that course so much. I've always been a big reader, but writing came really late.
No, that makes sense. Bo, what questions I always monopolize.
She does. And I just wait my turn.
Ask some questions.
As a fellow Virginian over here in Winchester, what historical elements of Virginia did you pull off of for your novels? Did anything inspire you?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So I'm over here in Albemarle County, right? And down south, about 2 hours, is Franklin County near Roanoke. And during Prohibition, it was called the moonshine capital of the world. And in 1935, there was a trial down there that at the time was the biggest trial ever in Virginia. It was called the Great Moonshine Conspiracy Trial. And I ended up taking that bit of history and moving it forward back into 1924 and using the premise of it, which is that there were during Prohibition, when there were local sheriffs and the FBI wasn't called the FBI. It was called the Bureau of Investigation. And they were trying to get all these moonshiners. And the jails became so overrun with moonshiners, small-time moonshiners, that the governor of Virginia said, all right, lay off the little guys. We're going to use our resources to get the big, important guys. Well, a group of crooked sheriffs and officials started taking kickback from all these little moonshiners, saying that they would keep them out of jail when in fact they weren't even supposed to be arresting them. So there was this big trial, hundreds of witnesses. So that definitely influenced my plot. And around where I live, there was a lot of moonshining going on here. And I'm in Keswick, Virginia, outside of Charlottesville. And just this house, this old house, like it has a double porch. And in my second book, a little boy runs away by going through the upstairs porch. Anyway, yeah, I think Virginia has a lot of history. Are you a native Virginian?
No, I moved here when I was in high school.
Okay.
So I've been here for like 15 years now.
Mhm.
Okay.
Wow.
I haven't pulled out another question yet, Erica.
I noticed that. I was noticing the delay in your question asking, Bo. But
sorry. All right.
no, but Liza, I want to know. So you published, when was your first book published?
In August of 2020, height of lockdown.
Wow.
I signed my book contract in March of 2020, and things were just starting to lock down. And I remember thinking, oh, those poor authors who have books coming out this spring. I'm so glad this will all be over by the time my book comes out. Well, the first one came out August 2020. All the bookstores were closed. No live events, no book tour, no nothing. And then a year later, second one came out, and the paperback version of the first. And again, just nothing going on. So that's it's the only way I've known, to go through publishing, but that was disappointing and rough. Yeah.
Wow.
How did you select your publisher?
They, my agent sent them, a query, and they made an offer, and they made the offer on the first manuscript, which went out, I guess it was like March of, I don't remember, 2018. And I was just wigging out, about the responses, and my agent would say, don't worry, these things take time. Meanwhile, I'm over in my MFA program trying to finish the second one. And I sent the second one to my agent, and I said, oh, well, let's just forget about the first one. I didn't want him to drop kick me, because I know some agents will say, the market has spoken. They don't want your book. Bye, have a nice life. So I sent him the second manuscript, and he said, no, I think something will happen with the first one. Just be patient. So sure enough, he called me. I was on the train back from New York, and speaking of drinking, I was on a 7.5-hour Amtrak trip, and I'd had 2 glasses of wine because, 7.5-hour trip. And I don't know, somewhere around Philadelphia, my phone rings. I'm like, who's calling me from New York? And it was my agent. And he said, Liza, I have an offer on your manuscript. And I was like, whoa, what? And he said, and I told them that you have a second one. That's a standalone sequel. And they said, send it over. So I did. So about 5 days passed, and they got back to us and said they wanted both of them. So, yeah.
That's very, very cool. So what are you working on right now?
Now I'm working on, I have a third manuscript that I have finished that's with an editor that I've hired. I've never done that before, because my first 2 books were developed with my first agent and with my MFA program, where I had these great advisors and peer group, to review my work. So I'm going to hopefully get it in shape to be sent out in the next month or so. And it's set in 1952. Also, a young woman from Virginia, not Keswick, not where I live, who ends up in Paris. And it has to do with the fashion piracy and design theft that was going on then in the couture industry, of people stealing designs and smuggling out drawings and illicit photographs of couture collections and then copying them and selling them, mass producing them, selling them.
Well, you're moving forward. Do you think that what is so you're doing that with an editor? Are you working on the next one now then?
Well, I mean, I'm working on this one that's set in 1953, and it hasn't sold. It hasn't gone out to publishers yet. So we will see. Fingers crossed.
Well, I mean, we wish you amazing luck with
Thank
that,
you.
Of course.
Thank you.
So go ahead, Bo.
What does your typical writing day look like when you're like neck deep in a manuscript before you get to like editing?
My best writing days don't happen here at home. They happen in seclusion or somewhere at a retreat or something. And Erica, I was in Scotland and England at writing retreats over the winter. One called Armagh in Yorkshire, England. They have 3 country houses where you can go for a week, and one has a course, and then there are 14 writers in this wonderful old house. And then the other one was called Moniac Moor in Inverness, Scotland, and that's an old farmhouse. And so my best work is in that sort of immersion where there's a rule of quiet and you can't speak, and they make your meals, but you also have to chip in and cook, one night and clean up after yourself, etc.
That would have to be interesting because not everybody's a great cook, but continuing.
Oh, listen, they had me cooking haggis for the Scottish people.
That doesn't sound like a great plan. That doesn't.
And they didn't make me. I was tasked with baking a vegan chocolate cake that I flubbed so historically that it went into the bin. I mean, you couldn't even put some ice cream on it. It was hopeless. But
I have to say, I'm a much bigger fan of haggis than I thought I would be.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think if it's done really well, I'm a big fan of it. You just can't serve it in the U.S. the way it's traditionally made.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting that they had they have a chef in residence, but she says, "Oh, here are the recipes," and then she leaves. And so they the other part of the menu, it was Burns night actually in Scotland. Robert Burns. They had a bagpiper and the whole 9 yards, and we drank scotch, of course. And they had neeps and tatties.
Okay.
Which is that vegetable called a swede that looks like a turnip on steroids. It's about this big.
I don't think I've ever heard of it. Yeah.
And then tatties are potatoes. So I had to peel, I don't know, hundreds of potatoes. And then someone else, a woman from Saudi Arabia, I think, had to do the gigantic swede and peel that. And we just had no idea what we were doing, but everybody ate it.
Did peeling potatoes help with your writing process?
Well, in that sort of when you're stuck into something where you just have to check your ego at the door, like cooking a meal in a where you don't even know what the ingredients are, and do it as a group. It's definitely team building and all. And and then after we would have our dinner at both of these places, you'd sit around the fire and we'd read work. Either people would recite poetry. I remember one woman reciting a poem in her native Irish, and it was just breathtaking. So we would, there's just a level of safety and camaraderie, being able to relate with other writers and share their journeys and where they are. And
that
yeah.
has to be so much fun, though. I think that, we don't talk a lot about writers' retreats, but I think it's something that people should absolutely look into.
I've always wanted to
Because
go to one. It sounds fun.
it can be very, very more. And again, like writers groups or anything else, you got to find the right one for you and stuff. Like I have a friend that just went on a writer's cruise. That is a cruise where you go and you just write for a week straight and stuff like that. And I think sometimes because it's very easy to get distracted by your life. And so being in a place where you can shut everything off, well, you should shut everything off. And especially a place that's not your normal, like you can get sucked into doing laundry or groceries, or I'm going to go do this thing. I think it can make a difference. And especially if you're surrounded by other authors that can keep you motivated and going and have similar struggles as you, because I think most of us are fortunate to live with very supportive people, but they're not necessarily authors. So they don't, when you say certain things, they don't get what you're like, why you're arguing with your character or something like that, and why that's such a big deal. They're like, okay, and they're trying to be supportive. And you're like, you don't understand.
You don't get it.
Yeah. Do you all live with people who are your first readers?
No.
My husband has not read my book.
Yeah. Mine didn't until he never asked to read it, which kind of broke my heart a little bit, until it was in print. And yet he could talk about it. Somebody'd say, "Oh, Liza, I understand you have a book coming out," and he would go off and talk, be explaining what it is. I'm like, you actually haven't read it. And then
so he was like internalizing it from what you've said.
Yeah. But he when I had some short stories published at the beginning, he would read them once they were out in the world, and then he'd say, "Oh, you should have put that comma here." That was kind of, I don't write what he enjoys reading, and that's fine. And so at this point, I don't really want I don't seek his input.
Yeah, mine has read, my boyfriend has read some of my horror stuff and things like that. But I find for me, like, I don't need him editing it or anything like that. If he asks and he wants to read it, it's fine. My humorous erotica, he doesn't read. But he's not the audience for it. It's not what he likes to read. So it's more, I have a very, very good friend who is the person who reads all of my stuff. And she is not like necessarily a beta reader. She is more just like after I can call her and go, I'm having this, and this is what I was thinking, and blah, blah, blah. And then here are the pages. What do you think? Did I do a good enough job? You know what I mean? And she's that gauge for me. But it's kind of like you discover, I think a lot of us discover that our friends and family, as much as we'd like them to be our number one fans, they're not our number one fans. You're
right. And also I found when I, with my past two books, I've had friends who read the sorts of books that I write, and I will send it to them and say, find what's wrong. Tell me what you don't like. And they get back and say, oh, I really liked it. It's like they're afraid to say, what was this character doing? Or they're afraid to criticize. They don't, because then it becomes personal. So I try not to ask my nearest and dearest, because I don't really trust their comments all that much. Yeah. I think it works better to have a reading group that and respect, and they respect your work, and you're trying to just help each other and not worry about hurting someone's feelings so much.
I agree 10,000%. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Drinking with Authors. Hey, listeners. You know me, Erica Lance. You're just listening to me in the podcast that you have. But guess what? I'm doing something new.
Yeah, she's joining me, Mark Muncy, the author of the Erie, Florida book series in Erie, Appalachia. And we are hosting a new podcast called Eerie Travels.
Woo-woo! Eerie Travels, which covers things like ghosts, cryptids, weird stuff, UFOs, men in black, all kinds of fun things that people talk about, and I'm sure you've discussed with friends.
Yep, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platform of choice, or find us at eerietravels.com and join in the fun and all the spooky goodness.
And of course, Mark, what do we always say?
We'll see you on the other side.
Okay, we're back. So let's talk about when you finally, have you been able to do an in-person event with your books now?
I have, with the second one, I was able to have an in-person book launch at my local indie bookshop in Charlottesville, Virginia, New Dominion Bookshop. They've been really supportive. And then, there's the train passes after a certain amount of time. When your book's been out for a year, they're on to the next book, as far as, social media. I did hire a publicist, and I think that helped a lot. I was supposed to appear at the Mississippi Book Festival, and that got canceled. And then other book festivals went virtual during lockdown, and then they could get, John Grisham from his living room. So why would they want me? So there was a lot of that. I have done book groups now, and some interviews. I got to interview Jeanette Walls a couple of weeks ago about her new historical novel. She lives up the road about half an hour from where I am. She has a new historical novel called Hang the Moon, and it's also set in Virginia in the 1920s. So I got to interview her. That was fun.
Very cool.
But a live event, I've always been one to sort of have stage fright and anxiety around being the center of attention and being in front of a crowd. So in a way, having my books come out during lockdown sort of got me through that, because everything was on Zoom, and I just, got over it. And then when you get out into the real world in front of a crowd or a book group or doing an interview, it hit me hard that, nobody's going to represent my work as well as I am. And they're here to be informed. And, I need to get over myself and do a good job at this. So that was a good thing to learn at the age of 60. Glad I did. Do you all ever have issues with, you certainly don't seem to have any issues with performing or being in front of a crowd?
I have severe anxiety. So.
Oh yeah,
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
Bo has anxiety. I don't, because so when I was much younger, I was terrified. I was a nerd. I was terrified of groups, crowds, talking. And then when I was 16 years old, I had this moment where I was like, I actually don't give a shit when anybody thinks of me. You either like me or you don't like me. That's how that goes. And then as an author, you're a celebrity. So you don't have to go out there as yourself. You go out there as your celebrity authorness, which is different, because you meet any actors and things like that. They could be completely nice, but they're putting on a performance when they go out on stage. When you're doing anything like that, it's a performance. So if you look at it through that lens and go, I'm going out there as Erica Lance author, that's who they're listening to, or Erica Lance podcast host, because it's sort of a different job than just yourself. Because here's the thing, if you can't do anything to change their opinion of you necessarily, right? You can just be there, be talking about what you want to talk about, and then they either like you or they don't like you. So that's why it's different for me. And I also think you should do things that you're afraid of.
I absolutely agree. And how fortunate you were to figure that out at such an early age. Yeah.
Well, that
So,
was
Bo, I
stage
also,
right. So yeah.
Bo, I have anxiety issues as well. And I ended up channeling them into one of the main characters of my second novel. She has paralyzing anxiety attacks. And
I can relate.
yeah. So yeah. So
I think there's a lot of
and
and there's a lot of fake it till you make it, because I've been to a lot of cons this year and been on a lot of panels this year. And a year ago, I would be like, there's no way I would do that. No way. But I think like Erica says, you put on this other like face and you're like, okay, I'm Bo author, not Bo person. And it kind of, you just kind of do it. And then once you make people laugh at a panel, then you're golden and you're like, oh, this is fine. I like this. I like that people are listening to me.
Yeah. And you know, every time you do it well or just get through it, it gets easier. I mean, yeah. I used to be physically shaking and worried that my voice was quavering. And it was a thing, and then it builds on itself. So that's been just a really valuable hurdle to get through at the age where I am, because I thought for the rest of my life I would just avoid ever being in front of a crowd of people having to say something.
And now people are showing up just to see you. So that's a new thing too. Like when people come up to me and they're like, I read your book and I really liked it. I'm like, my book? You're talking about my book? And like, it blows my mind still. It's just so crazy.
Yeah, it does.
It makes you feel real good.
It does feel good. And yet one of the things that surprised me the most about getting published was the vulnerability that when I realized that people I'd never heard of were going on Amazon and leaving reviews of my book, I felt, I don't know, I just felt so vulnerable. Like, it's out there in the world. Anybody can say anything about it, about me now. And it took me a little while to get used to that exposure, you know, not that I was, you know, like everybody was talking about my books. They weren't, but yeah, it's definitely something to deal with.
Yes. And I think, you know, one of the things too we have to remember is that your fans are like that too. You do have fans that have the inability to come up to you and be like, hey, I love your thing, you know, because they have crippling anxiety themselves, you know, and can relate.
I mean, I've never been like, oh, I'm gonna go up to a celebrity and tell them that I like their stuff. Like at the last convention I was at, there was like a podcaster. I'm like, oh, I love this person. And everyone's like, go talk to him. And I'm like, I can't go talk to him. I can't tell him that. It's like I hid. So I think it's probably a lot of that too. Like, your readers are like, I can't go talk to them. If I talk to them, then they are going to perceive me, and that can't happen. Like,
yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I was at a book festival before my books came out, and Colson Whitehead was the headliner, and I'm such a fan of his. And he was at the reception afterwards, and he like sort of walked in, and I was standing. I was like the first person he encountered. And I thought, I cannot. And I had this posse of college girlfriends with me, and they knew that I was so in love with his books. And the Underground Railroad had just come out. And one of them just came right over with her phone and said, let me get a picture. And I just, you know, here I am, me, Colson Whitehead. And we ended up having a really nice conversation, and I got him a drink. And it wouldn't have happened. I would not have gone after him, but he kind of like, you know, just walked right in, and there I was. So I understand what you're saying, but I always kick myself afterwards. Like, damn, why didn't I go over and get that photo and tell that person, you know, that I like their work?
You could have become like best friends.
Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah.
Famous things. Okay. So we are going to go into our literary briefs. Dun, dun, dun.
Don't we have theme music now for that?
I think there's music now. I'm 95% sure there's music, but it's fine.
Is it just you going dun, dun, dun?
I'm not even sure. So it's fine. It's fine. They swear there's music. I haven't checked it. I believe them. Okay. So, Liza, you ready?
I don't know what we're doing.
We're doing rapid fire
questions.
Okay.
And they're hard, so get ready.
Yikes.
They're not.
Okay.
They're not hard. Don't give her anxiety. What are you doing, Bo? We just had that conversation, and now you.
Well,
Okay, let me have another sip of my Aperol
Have
Spritz.
us, yeah, let's all just
Take a
do
big
that.
old
Prepare for
gulp.
Bo to be terrifying. Okay, Liza, what is your favorite book of all time?
Oh, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens.
Very, very cool. Why?
I love all of Dickens, and his characterization is amazing, and his plotting, I think, I've always admired. Yeah.
Okay, I like it. I also got to see Eddie Izzard do Great Expectations, the one-woman show. It was pretty amazing in New York.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool.
And Miss Havisham. I mean, is there a better character in the whole world than Miss Havisham? I don't think so.
What about your least favorite book?
Oof. Wow. Oh, I've forgotten them. I'd either put them aside. I'm at the age now where I don't feel obliged to finish a book if I don't like it.
That's fine. It can be one of those that you put aside. And it's not.
I'm having a hard time coming up with a title, but I would say the genre is that sort of God, I hate this term, chick lit, of with product placement. Like she made up her bed with the Frette 400 count cotton sheets and poured herself a glass of Veuve Clicquot, and that I just cannot endure. I just cannot. So I would say, and you all know what I'm talking about. Okay,
yes.
I can't come up with the title right now, but that. Sorry, dogs are barking.
That's we can't hear them, and I get it. Okay, Bo, what question do you want to ask next?
Who is your favorite author of all time?
That's a toughie. Of living authors, I would say Donna Tartt. Of all time, Zora Neale Hurston is a huge favorite. Their Eyes Were Watching God is oh my God, that audiobook. Do y'all like audiobooks? I am such an audiobook person. Oh, and okay, sorry, I'm having more than one. True Grit by Charles Portis. If I had to tell people to read one book, it would be that one. And Donna Tartt reads that audiobook amazingly.
Very cool.
Slays it. Yeah. So yeah, I would say yeah.
I love Donna Tartt's Secret History. That's my favorite of hers.
Yes. Brilliant book.
Well, who's your least favorite author of all time?
Anyone who writes books with product placement and
wow, Bo. Wow.
Yeah, I don't have I can't come up with one, and I'm not being coy. I just honestly I can't come up. Who's Colleen Hoover? Okay.
Yeah, a lot of people are into that now.
I don't have it in for her or anything, but I can't get past page 2.
It's just something that you don't like. That's fine.
Yeah,
that's how
exactly.
that works.
Exactly.
We're not going to make everyone happy as authors. We will.
Right.
Yeah.
What about who would you cast as the leads in both your books?
Oh. Millie Bobby Brown. Most could be either the character in the first one or the second one. I think she's just amazing. Although in 2020, when the first one came out, the main character is 20 years old. I thought Elle Fanning would be really good as a sort of flapper.
Who she would be.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then there's an African-American character who is inspired by Josephine Baker. And I thought Kerry Washington would just be amazing to play her.
Very, very cool. Now, if you could have lunch with any author, alive or dead, who would you want to have lunch with? Charles Dickens? Or would you choose someone else?
I would probably say maybe Toni Morrison, but I think I'd be so intimidated that
You got
I
to go
wouldn't
sit
be
at the
able
other table.
to speak. Um, who else? Emily Bronte.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. What about your favorite book to movie adaptation?
Oh. I just love, there's so many BBC adaptations I love of the classic English literature of Jane Austen, and I really like the period pieces, but I'm having a hard time coming up with maybe Pride and Prejudice, sort of in any, especially didn't they do it recently and it was sort of off script? I think it was Pride and Prejudice.
So. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll go with that.
What about least favorite, where you do not think they did a great job with it?
I didn't think, speaking of Donna Tartt, I didn't think The Goldfinch was as compelling as the novel.
Very cool. Okay, what about your favorite writing snack? When you're sitting down and writing, what is your favorite snack to have?
Kind of like what's ever in front of the shelf in the refrigerator when I open the door. But I do, when I'm like on a deadline for editing or something, I let myself have unlimited Diet Pepsi and candy. I love candy. So Good and Plenty's.
Oh,
A lot of hot tamales, the candy. Yeah.
so you're like movie theater candy.
Oh yeah. Milk duds. Mm-hmm.
Oh, milk duds.
Yeah. So my second novel, In All Good Faith, set in 1932, that one, it has to do with the candy industry, and the people who live in this house now in the 1930s during the Great Depression are turning, they originally turned to moonshining in the 20s, and then in the 30s with the same family, they are changing the family orchard business where they can preserves and jelly and stuff. There were all kinds of blights and droughts and crop failures, and crops weren't bringing any money. So they change over to candy production. So I had to do a lot of research on candy. I'm a huge candy person. So candy and Diet Pepsi are my indulgent snacks.
I like it. And I need to write a book about candy or chocolate or something, because then I can chalk up my horrible eating habits too. I'm researching my
I feel
book.
like it's research.
Yeah, exactly. Researching my book. Bo?
If there was a genre, what genre would you write? Or let me rephrase that. What genre would you like to write if you weren't going to write historical fiction?
Literary fiction. I would love to think that I could create like super highbrow sentences and have a vocabulary that would just, blow people away. But yeah, definitely that.
Very cool. What about where's somewhere you would love to travel to, if like price and time and stuff was no limit, you could go anywhere, where would you go?
Ooh, Paris is my favorite place, and my first book is partially set there, and the book I'm working on now is mostly set there. But as to what time period, I'd like to think in the 20s, but as much I think as we romanticize the 20s and 30s, they were hard times. Life was harder. But yeah, maybe Paris in the 20s. I think about what was a Woody Allen movie, Midnight in Paris, that was so fabulous, with those all the literary characters and going to the speakeasies. Well, they weren't speakeasies, but nightclubs. I think that'd be fun.
Very cool. What about a literary world? Where would you go?
Victorian England, maybe. Does that London?
No, totally. Because the way the books write them, a lot of times, like That's the version I would go to, because otherwise they didn't have deodorant. They didn't bathe very frequently. There were teeth problems. Like, there's a list, right? But you go for like Victorian England in some books, and you all that's swept over, and they have this beautiful smile and all that. So
Yeah. Meanwhile, the streets are full of horse shit, and it wasn't really, as we romanticize that a lot.
of course we do, because nobody wants to read about the other times, right? Like,
Right.
that's not a thing. Bo, I'm
How
gonna
do
give
you
you a
deal-
question, then
Oh.
I'm gonna do final. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I don't have to do the best question because you're gonna do the best question because you're the last
Okay, you know
one.
what? You and your pressure, just ask the darn question.
How do you deal with writer's block?
Don't hate me. I haven't actually had a period of experiencing it because I haven't been at this all that long. With this book that I'm working on now, I wasn't on a deadline. So I had the luxury of putting it aside for a while. And what I found was that I started it, I guess, 3 years ago now, but it was while my first 2 books were coming out. So I had to sort of keep those sets of characters in my head to be able to talk about them and remember historical dates and places and reactions and relationships between the characters. So I had to keep those fresh. So I didn't want to clutter my mind with a new set of characters. So I kept sort of putting that off, and it wasn't really a block. It was more of a just putting it all aside. And then the second book came out, and I would also have to talk about the first book because they connect. So that was a challenge. But then it got to be frustrating because I wanted to start telling this third story that was really getting somewhere in my head. And then at a certain point, I was able to just sort of luxuriate in getting this out. And there have been times, I wouldn't call it block, but there have been times when I have put it aside, and because I don't write sequentially, I write scenes and then cobble them together, sort of knowing where they're going to end up. So yeah, I wouldn't say I was blocked, but I would say that there were definitely times in the past couple of years when I have put this project aside, knowing that I couldn't quite go forward with it. And if I'd been on a deadline, I'd have called it writer's block.
Very cool.
How about y'all?
Okay.
Do y'all have writer's block? What do you do about
Every
it?
day. Every day.
I don't have writer's block. I think a lot of times writer's block is you've gone down a way of the story that doesn't work, and you need to go back to where it was doing well, because I think a lot of times you try to force yourself through this thing because you're like, no, they're going to get on the subway, right? But it doesn't work to put them on the subway. So you will wound yourself up trying to put them on the damn subway instead of just calling it a day and doing that. And also, I think you have to know your own way of writing, depending on the mood and what's going on in your life. If you're really stressed out, it may not be a good time to write, and you're not going to get a lot. But sitting down, like there was an author, and I can't forget his name right now because Jen, but who had said that he writes like a minimum of like 200 words a day or something like that. That's his goal. He sits down, and sometimes it's just garbage. Like the next day he just deletes all of it. But then sometimes that leads him to writing 5,000 words in a day because it's going well. So I think you can get writer's block, but I always feel like it's when you're trying to force something that can't be forced, like is not working. So go back to when it was doing well, or skip and go to another part of the story and let that go, because writer's block only gets to be a block if you sit in it for too long.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Where I get myself in trouble is I'll find some interesting historical factoid and want to sort of shoehorn it into the plot somewhere. And then I find I'm sort of writing around it. And like you said, Erica, I have to finally tell myself, this has to come out.
Excise it, take it out, use it for a different project later.
Yeah. How about you, Bo?
I have really bad imposter syndrome, I think is part of it. And when I don't have a deadline, my brain just like freely moves around and I don't get anything done because I'm lost in this like mire of all these ideas. And like, I need to like focus on one thing. And I just have a really busy schedule too with work and a kid. So I'm just like, writing is going to go on the back burner. I'll figure it out eventually. And then I just start playing Baldur's Gate 3 and don't write. So I keep getting distracted. That's my problem.
And I don't consider that nearly as much sort of writer's block as just like not sitting down and actually being able to make time to write. It's different when you're sitting there looking at the screen and the cursor.
But I just write the same section over and over again. I don't move on. I just keep rewriting that same section.
Yeah,
it's very
you gotta stop doing that.
I know.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, you read things and they say, oh, just, get it down, just get the draft finished. But I'm like, no.
It has to be perfect.
That word back there. And I haven't come up with the right word. And yeah, I'm forever going 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Yeah.
No, that's never good. Okay. Final question. Do you read your reviews?
Oh, talk about imposter syndrome. I don't anymore is the answer to that. I did at the beginning because I was just deer in the headlights. Wow, there's a page on Amazon with my name on it, and if you Google me, wow, I'm on Amazon. And I started reading them all. And what happens is, being someone who also has imposter syndrome, is you internalize the bad. And the good just kind of floats away. And it got to be really painful, shameful feeling. I internalized it as feelings of shame. And that was, I finally got to the point where I said, I cannot put myself through this. So I go on and I look at the star rating of how many reviews there are and where my star rating is. Like, I occasionally in a downtime or whatever, in a moment of weakness, I will go read some. And somebody gave me 1 star because the book wouldn't load on their Kindle. It was like a free it was free for a week or something. And I was like, I cannot, that cannot define me. So I don't.
You're like, I didn't put it on your Kindle. I'm sorry.
Well, no, it's here's the thing about reviews. People tend to write reviews when in a more negative way. It's unfortunate, but people tend to, if they're pissed off about something, review it more than if they positively liked it. Also, the review engines for a lot of these things, like on Kindle, it's not easy to review a book. It's not. So I think that you have to remember that the reviews are for the readers and not for the author. The only thing I think reviews can be good for is especially if you're self-published and you're not taking the means of getting things edited and things like that. Those are the reviews where they go, hey, there's a bunch of plot holes in this. This character changes race halfway through. It doesn't make sense. There's a lot of stuff where I feel like reviews can do correction of writing and if that's happening, that's terrible because that's going to forever be there. But I think a lot of times reviews are not the greatest thing to measure yourself as an author. It's just the quantity of them, really. And that's for search algorithms, not because they mean anything, the actual writing, Okay. Yeah. Liza, shameless self-promotion time. Where do people find you and your books?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your local indie, they're in hardcover, paperback, and audiobooks. So Audible, also, if you like audio books. Yeah. Very and cool. My website, LizaNashTaylor.com.
Very, very cool. Awesome. It was so wonderful having you on this podcast with us.
Erica and both, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I'm honored to be your guest.
Awesome. We're honored to have you. So, guys, this has been Drinking with Authors. I've been your host, Erica Lance. My co-host has been the amazing Bo Lake. Our guest has been Liza Taylor. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review. We say that all the time. We haven't gotten a lot of reviews, so I can tell that you're not listening. No, just kidding. Or you're drinking along with us. It's fine. But definitely don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you next time.